Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you're about to embark on a journey through ancient wisdom that will quietly transform your mind as you drift into peaceful sleep. I'm going to share with you a carefully curated collection of profound Zen stories that hold the power to reshape your thoughts, release your tensions, and guide you into the deepest, most restorative rest you've experienced in years. Each narrative contains profound teachings that will work on your subconscious mind throughout the night, helping you wake with greater clarity, compassion, and inner peace. These aren't simple tales for entertainment. They're sacred teachings, preserved by awakened masters who grasped something most of humanity has lost sight of. That serenity isn't discovered by altering our external world, but by transforming our inner relationship to it. The Buddha once observed, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." In the coming hours, you'll uncover precisely how this eternal truth can reshape your contemporary existence. As we explore stories of proud scholars learning emptiness, wandering teachers discovering compassion in humble homes, and masters who find wisdom in accepting what others reject, you'll sense something extraordinary beginning to unfold. The rigid tension of worry will start to dissolve. The relentless stream of mental chatter will begin to subside. You'll find yourself naturally drifting into a state of deep understanding and peaceful rest. These stories have been shared in sacred halls, contemplated by generations of truth seekers, and transmitted through lineages of wisdom keepers. Each one serves as a master key that opens a different gateway in the temple of your awareness. Some passages lead to sanctuaries where resentment loses its grip. Others reveal spaces where the compulsion to possess simply evaporates. Still others unveil inner chambers where pure awareness becomes your greatest guide. So allow yourself to settle completely now. Let your entire being melt into whatever cradles you. Join me in taking one mindful breath, and as you release it, understand that you're about to receive teachings that have been patiently awaiting your arrival since time immemorial. Our first story begins with a scene that has unfolded countless times throughout history. A seeker arriving at the door of wisdom, believing they are ready to receive profound teachings. This is the story of the empty cup. In the bustling intellectual climate of Japan's Meiji era, when Western ideas were flooding into the country and traditional ways were being questioned, there lived a renowned Zen master named Non-In. His temple was a sanctuary of ancient wisdom amid the rapidly changing world outside its gates. The morning sun filtered through the paper screens of his modest tea room, casting gentle shadows on the tatami mats below. One afternoon, a distinguished university professor approached the temple seeking an audience. His reputation preceded him. He was known throughout academic circles as a brilliant scholar, well-versed in philosophy and the emerging scientific methods of understanding the human mind. "Master Non-In," the professor announced with confidence, "I have come to inquire about Zen. I have studied many philosophical traditions and read extensively about Eastern thought. I believe I am ready to understand what Zen truly offers." Non-In received his guest with quiet grace, gesturing for the professor to sit across from him at the low wooden table. Without a word, he began preparing tea. The professor watched with barely contained impatience as the master carefully cleaned each utensil and heated water to precisely the right temperature. As fragrant steam rose from the teapot, Non-In began pouring the golden liquid into his visitor's cup. The professor nodded appreciatively, ready to begin their intellectual discourse. But something unexpected happened. Non-in continued pouring. The tea reached the rim of the cup, and still the master poured. The hot liquid spilled over the edges, pooling on the wooden table, dripping onto the tatami mat below. The professor watched in growing alarm as the precious tea overflowed, staining the table and creating a puddle on the floor. His scholarly mind raced to understand what was happening. Was this some kind of test? The waste seemed senseless, almost disrespectful. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, the professor burst out. "Master, stop! It is overfull! No more will go in!" Non-in set down the teapot with the same careful attention he had used to lift it. He looked directly into his visitor's eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the gentle authority of someone who had spent decades understanding the human condition. "Like this cup," Non-in said simply, "you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This ancient teaching illuminates the fundamental challenge we face in approaching any genuine spiritual practice. Our minds, conditioned by years of accumulating information, opinions, and conceptual frameworks, can become so filled with what we think we know that there is no space for fresh insight to enter. Why do we arrive at the doorstep of wisdom carrying so much baggage? Zen Buddhism points to several deeply ingrained patterns. First is our educational conditioning, which teaches us that learning means accumulating information rather than through direct, immediate experience. Second is what Buddhism calls the expert mind, the subtle pride that comes from having studied something extensively. Third is our deep attachment to our existing worldview, which the ego naturally resists dissolving. Consider how this pattern manifests in everyday life. When someone tries to give us feedback, how often do we immediately defend our existing understanding rather than listening with genuine openness? When we attend a lecture, are we truly present to learn something new, or are we primarily comparing what we hear to what we already believe? The Buddha taught, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. This teaching points to the profound freedom available when we approach life with what Zen calls don't know mind. A quality of open, curious attention that doesn't prejudge what it might discover. The empty cup represents more than intellectual humility. It points toward a fundamental stance toward existence itself. When we can hold our opinions, beliefs, and accumulated knowledge lightly, we create space for wisdom to emerge spontaneously from the immediacy of our experience. Tonight, as you notice your mind forming opinions about these words, can you practice emptying your cup? What would it feel like to approach tomorrow's conversations and experiences with the fresh curiosity of a beginner? As the Buddha taught, it is better to travel well than to arrive. The journey of continuously emptying our cups is itself the destination, creating endless opportunities for discovery in the most ordinary moments of life. Let us now turn to a tale that reveals how true wisdom expresses itself through compassionate action rather than elevated position. This is the story of Gudo and the emperor's teacher. Despite holding the prestigious position of spiritual teacher to the emperor himself, Gudo regularly abandoned the luxury and security of his elevated status to wander the countryside as a simple mendicant monk. On one particular journey to Edo, he found himself caught in a sudden autumn storm that transformed peaceful mountain paths into treacherous passages within minutes. By evening, Gudo was thoroughly drenched, his straw sandals completely disintegrated, leaving his feet bare and bleeding. As darkness fell, he approached the small village of Takinaka. Through rain-blurred windows of a modest farmhouse, he noticed several pairs of sandals displayed for sale. The woman who answered his knock took one look at the bedraggled figure before her and immediately saw beyond any credentials to his basic human need for shelter. Without knowing his prestigious position, she invited him to spend the night, offering the simple hospitality that rural Japanese culture considered sacred duty. After Gudo had recited evening sutras before the family's modest shrine, he became aware of heavy sadness permeating the household. The children seemed withdrawn, the grandmother's eyes carried deep worry, and his hostess moved with weary resignation. "What troubles this family?" Gudo asked gently. The woman's story poured out. Her husband was trapped in the destructive cycle of gambling and drinking. When fortune smiled on him, he would celebrate by drinking himself into violent rages. When luck abandoned him, he would borrow money, accumulating debts that threatened everything they had built. Often, consumed by shame and alcohol, he would disappear for days. Rather than offering conventional religious advice, Gudo surprised her with a practical proposal. "I will help him. Please use this money to buy a gallon of fine wine and something good to eat. Then retire. I will meditate before the shrine." Near midnight, the husband staggered home in his typical drunken state. Instead of his usual reception, he found a stranger sitting peacefully in his home. "I have something for you," Gudo announced warmly. "I was caught in tonight's storm, and your wife graciously offered me shelter. In gratitude, I've provided wine and fish for your enjoyment." The man's aggressive posture immediately softened. He drank the wine gladly and collapsed onto the floor, but this time he was not alone. Throughout the night, Gudo sat in silent meditation beside the sleeping man. When morning came and the husband awakened with his typical confusion, he found the strange monk still sitting in meditation. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am Gudo of Kyoto," the master replied simply. "And I am traveling to Edo." The man's face went white with shock. Everyone in Japan knew that name. Gudo was the spiritual teacher of the emperor himself, yet instead of harsh judgment, Gudo offered perspective. Everything in this life is impermanent. Life is very brief. If you continue gambling and drinking, you will have no time left to accomplish anything meaningful, and you will cause continued suffering for those who love you. The words penetrated the man's consciousness like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "How can I ever repay you for this teaching?" he asked, his voice breaking with genuine remorse. What followed became legendary. The man walked with Gudo for miles, finally declaring, "I am going to follow you for the rest of my life." And he did, becoming known as Munan, the one who never turned back. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound transformation that occurred in that humble farmhouse. Gudo understood that lasting change rarely comes through confrontation, but through the unexpected grace of unconditional acceptance. Why do we so often approach others' destructive behaviors with judgment rather than compassion? Buddhist psychology points to our attachment to being right, which creates adversarial dynamics, and our impatience with gradual transformation. Consider how this wisdom applies to relationships with family members or friends whose behaviors concern us. How often do we approach them with lectures, rather than the spacious presence that creates room for their own awakening? Tonight, as you consider people whose behaviors challenge your patience, can you find the capacity to offer presence rather than judgment? What might shift if you could approach others' struggles with curiosity about their underlying pain? As the Buddha taught, be a lamp for yourselves. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is simply the steady light of our own presence. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story that challenges our deepest attachments to reputation and social standing. This is the profound tale of Hakuin and the power of "Is that so?" In a peaceful Japanese village where everyone knew their neighbor's business and social harmony depended on maintaining collective respect for moral conduct, there lived a Zen master named Hakuin. His reputation was spotless. The villagers praised him as a model of spiritual purity, someone whose very presence seemed to elevate the moral atmosphere of their community. Near Hakuin's temple lived a beautiful young woman whose parents owned the village's main food store. The seasonal rhythms of village life continued peacefully, until one day her parents made a shocking discovery. Their unmarried daughter was pregnant. In a society where family honor was considered more precious than individual happiness, this revelation sent shockwaves through the household. Under relentless questioning, the young woman steadfastly refused to name the father. Finally, perhaps seeking to protect someone she loved, she spoke a name that stunned everyone: Hakuin. The parents, consumed by righteous anger and humiliation, stormed to Hakuin's temple to confront him. "Our daughter says you are the father of her child," they declared, their voices shaking with fury. Hakuin received their accusation with the same serene attention he might give to a question about the weather. His response was so simple, so utterly without defensiveness, that it left them momentarily speechless. "Is that so?" That was all. No denials, no outrage, no attempts to defend his reputation. Just those 3 words, spoken with complete equanimity. The villager's shock quickly transformed into condemnation. His apparent lack of denial seemed to confirm his guilt. The reputation Hakuin had spent decades building crumbled overnight. Former admirers turned away when they saw him. Students stopped coming. The respect and support he had enjoyed vanished like morning mist. When the baby was born, the parents brought the infant directly to Hakuin. By this time, his social ostracism was complete. Yet something remarkable happened when he received the child. He cared for the baby with extraordinary tenderness, walking to neighboring villages to obtain milk when local families refused to sell to him. He found clean cloth for diapers, sang gentle lullabies during sleepless nights, and carried the infant everywhere with devoted attention. For an entire year, Hakuin lived as a social outcast, caring for a child that everyone believed was evidence of his moral failure. He accepted the daily humiliation of being scorned by a community that had once revered him. Then, as suddenly as the accusation had come, the truth emerged. The young mother could no longer bear the weight of her deception. In tears and remorse, she revealed to her parents that the real father was a young man who worked in the fish market. The parents faced a terrible reckoning. Humbled and ashamed, they returned to Hakuin to apologize and reclaim the child. They prepared elaborate speeches of remorse, expecting either righteous anger or magnanimous forgiveness. Hakuin listened to their apologies with the same calm attention he had given their accusations. When they asked for the child back, his response was identical. "Is that so?" Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger. This profound teaching reveals the heart of Hakuin's extraordinary response. He understood that our emotional reactions to others' opinions create far more suffering than the opinions themselves. Why do we struggle so intensely with protecting our reputations? Buddhist psychology identifies our identification with social image, believing that what others think determines our worth. We unconsciously equate criticism with annihilation, praise with survival. The phrase, "Is that so?" represents more than passive acceptance. It embodies what Zen calls don't know mind, a quality of openness that doesn't need to defend any particular version of reality. From this perspective, others' opinions become simply more information in the vast flow of experience. Tonight, as you notice yourself defending your choices or crafting your image for others' approval, can you experiment with Hakuin's profound question? What would shift if you could meet both criticism and praise with genuine curiosity? As the Buddha said, in the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. Now let us explore a Zen story about the subtle art of influence and the power of natural authority. This is the tale of Bankai and the unborn nature of wisdom. In 17th century Japan, there lived a remarkable Zen master named Bankai, whose approach to teaching was unlike anything his contemporaries had experienced. While other religious leaders impressed audiences with elaborate quotations from sacred texts and complex philosophical arguments, Bankai spoke with the simple directness of someone sharing observations about the weather. His temple had become a gathering place unlike any other in Japan. People from every social class made pilgrimages to hear him speak. Farmers, merchants, government officials, and even members of rival Buddhist sects. What made these gatherings extraordinary was Bankai's complete lack of pretension. He never quoted sutras to demonstrate learning, never engaged in intellectual debates, and never claimed special powers. He simply spoke from direct experience to the direct experience of his listeners. This natural approach attracted hundreds to his talks, filling the temple grounds and spilling into the surrounding forest. But not everyone appreciated Bankai's growing influence. A priest from the Nichiren sect, watching his own congregation dwindle as people flocked to hear the Zen master, found himself consumed with jealousy. The Nichiren priest's wounded ego convinced him that Bankai must be using some kind of trickery to attract so many followers. Determined to publicly humiliate Bankai and win back his lost adherents, the priest made his way to one of the master's gatherings. In the middle of Bankai's gentle discourse about the unborn Buddha nature within every person, the priest suddenly stood up and called out in a voice designed to intimidate, "Hey, Zen teacher, whoever respects you will obey what you say, but a man like myself does not respect you. Can you make me obey you?" The challenge hung in the air. The assembled crowd turned to watch this confrontation, expecting either angry retaliation or a demonstration of superior spiritual power. The priest stood proudly, certain he had created an impossible situation. Bankai's response was so unexpected, so completely free of defensiveness or aggression, that it shifted the entire dynamic instantly. "Come up beside me, and I will show you," Bankai said with the warm invitation of someone genuinely interested in helping rather than defeating his challenger. Something in the master's tone, perhaps its complete lack of threat or competition, caused the priest to move forward through the crowd without conscious decision. One moment, he was standing with his hostile challenge. The next, he found himself approaching the teaching platform. "Come over to my left side," Bankai suggested pleasantly, as if they were old friends arranging themselves for comfortable conversation. The priest, somehow disarmed by Bankai's gentle manner, stepped to the left. "No," said Bankai thoughtfully. We may talk better if you're on the right side. Step over here." Without pausing to consider why, the priest moved to the right side of the platform. Bankei smiled with genuine warmth. "You see," he observed gently, "you are obeying me, and I think you are a very gentle person. Now sit down and listen." The priest found himself sitting beside the very man he had come to humiliate. His aggressive challenge transformed into curious attention. The crowd relaxed into appreciative laughter at the elegant way Bankei had demonstrated his point without creating a single enemy. The Buddha once said, "Speak only endearing speech, speech that is welcomed." This teaching captures the essence of Bankei's masterful response. He understood that true authority doesn't need to defend itself through force or argument, but reveals itself through natural influence, emerging from genuine presence and compassion. What deeper teaching lies in this exchange? Zen Buddhism points to several insights about authentic power. First, resistance creates resistance. The priest came prepared for battle, but Bankei refused to engage in combat, offering invitation instead. Second, everyone naturally responds to genuine care. Beneath the priest's aggression was a human being seeking recognition, and Bankei's willingness to engage with interest rather than defensiveness touched something universal, disarming hostility more effectively than any argument. Consider how often we encounter challenging people. Colleagues who question our decisions, family members who criticize our choices, strangers who respond to kindness with suspicion. How do we typically react? Do we meet aggression with counter-aggression, creating the very conflicts we wish to avoid? Bankei's approach reveals another possibility. When we remain centered in authentic presence rather than reactive to others' provocations, we create space for unexpected transformation. Tonight, as you consider relationships where you feel the need to defend your position, can you imagine responding with Bankei's graceful confidence? What might become possible if you could meet challenges with curious invitation rather than defensive resistance? As the Buddha taught, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. Bankei's story demonstrates how this wisdom translates into practical action. Let us continue on our journey with a story that reveals the difference between authentic love and selfish desire. This is the tale of Eshun and the power of truth spoken in daylight. In a remote mountain monastery where the morning mist clung to ancient pine trees and the sound of temple bells echoed across valleys, 21 devoted practitioners gathered daily for meditation and spiritual instruction under the guidance of a revered Zen master. Among this community of seekers was one woman, a nun named Eshun, whose presence brought both inspiration and unexpected challenges to the monastery's carefully maintained atmosphere of spiritual discipline. Despite having taken the traditional vows that required her to shave her head and wear the plain robes of a monastic, Eshun possessed a natural beauty that seemed to emanate from something deeper than physical appearance. Her grace in walking meditation, the clarity of her questions during Dharma talks, and the gentle strength she brought to community work created an aura that several of the younger monks found increasingly difficult to ignore. The monastery's daily rhythm continued with its prescribed pattern of meditation, work, study, and rest. But beneath the surface, unspoken tensions were building. During group sitting meditation, certain monks found their attention wandering from their breath to stolen glances at Eshun. In the dining hall, conversations would pause when she entered. The very presence of authentic spiritual beauty was creating desires that contradicted the celibate path these practitioners had chosen. One autumn evening, as golden leaves fell outside the meditation hall and oil lamps cast dancing shadows on wooden walls. One of the younger monks made a decision that would challenge the entire community's understanding of love, desire, and spiritual authenticity. Unable to contain the romantic fantasies that had been consuming his meditation practice for weeks, he wrote Eshun a letter confessing his passionate feelings and requesting a private meeting away from the watchful eyes of their teacher and fellow practitioners. The letter was filled with the kind of idealized language that confuses spiritual admiration with romantic love, describing how her presence had awakened something profound within him, how he believed their connection transcended ordinary relationships, and how he was certain that she must feel the same magnetic attraction he experienced whenever they were in the same room. He slipped the letter beneath her door after evening prayers, his heart racing with the mixture of excitement and transgression that accompanies secret actions. Eshun discovered the letter during her late-night personal meditation period. She read it carefully, recognizing both the sincerity of the young monk's feelings and the fundamental confusion about the nature of spiritual practice that his words revealed. Rather than responding immediately with either acceptance or rejection, she chose a path that would serve not only her own spiritual development, but potentially awaken deeper understanding in her admirer and the entire community. The following day arrived with the crisp clarity that mountain mornings bring, and the community gathered as usual for their master's daily lecture. The teacher spoke about the nature of attachment and the ways that spiritual seeking can sometimes become entangled with ordinary desires disguised as transcendent longings. His words seemed to address the very tensions that had been building within the monastery, though he gave no indication of knowing about the specific situation developing between Eshun and her secret admirer. When the formal teaching period concluded and the master had answered the usual questions about practice, an unexpected moment of profound teaching was about to unfold. Eshun rose from her meditation cushion with the deliberate composure of someone who had made a difficult but necessary decision. The community turned their attention to her, expecting perhaps a question about the morning's Dharma talk or a request for clarification about some aspect of monastic life. Instead, Eshun addressed her words directly to the monk who had written the letter, her voice carrying across the silent meditation hall with the clear authority of someone speaking absolute truth. If you really love me so much, come and embrace me now. The challenge hung in the air like incense smoke, creating a moment of such intense spiritual confrontation that every person in the room felt the weight of what was being revealed. The young monk's face flushed crimson as he realized that his private romantic fantasy was being exposed in the full light of community awareness. His secret desire, which had seemed so profound and meaningful in the darkness of his imagination, suddenly revealed itself as something he could not authentically claim or act upon when called to manifest it openly. As the Buddha understood, three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound teaching moment Eshun created through her brilliant challenge. She understood that authentic love and selfish desire reveal their true natures when exposed to the light of public scrutiny and genuine spiritual community. Why do we so often confuse romantic attraction with spiritual connection? Buddhist psychology points to several patterns that create this confusion. First is our tendency to project our own unmet needs onto others who seem to embody qualities we admire or feel we lack. The monk's attraction to Eshun likely reflected his own desire to possess her spiritual grace rather than cultivate it within himself. Second is our habit of spiritualizing ordinary desires to make them seem more acceptable or elevated. When we experience strong attraction to someone, especially in a spiritual context, we often convince ourselves that this feeling represents some higher form of connection, rather than recognizing it as the basic human tendency toward attachment and possession. Third is our confusion between appreciation and appropriation. We can genuinely appreciate someone's beauty, wisdom, or spiritual presence without needing to possess or control them. True love celebrates the beloved's freedom and authenticity, while selfish desire seeks to capture and claim them for our own satisfaction. Consider how this dynamic plays out in your own relationships and attractions. When you feel drawn to someone, can you distinguish between genuine care for their well-being and the desire to possess something about them for yourself? How often do romantic feelings arise from authentic connection versus projection and fantasy? Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck observed, "Love is not what we think it is. Love is purely and simply appreciation without a single demand." Eshun's challenge revealed the demanding nature of the monk's feelings. His love was conditional upon her responding to his desires and meeting his needs, rather than honoring her chosen path and spiritual commitments. The Buddha said, "If you truly loved yourself, you would never harm yourself with negative thoughts and emotions." This teaching extends to how we love others. When our feelings for someone create suffering, secrecy, or demands for them to be different than they are, we are not expressing love, but rather attachment disguised as affection. What made Eshun's response so skillful was her refusal to shame the monk, while simultaneously exposing the confusion underlying his approach. By inviting him to act publicly on his private desires, she created an opportunity for him to recognize the difference between fantasy and reality, between genuine spiritual connection and romantic projection. The power of her challenge lay not in humiliation, but in illumination. In that moment, the monk could see clearly that his attraction was based on idealized images rather than authentic relationship, that his desire for privacy revealed the questionable nature of his intentions, and that true love would never ask someone to compromise their spiritual commitments for personal gratification. Tonight, as you reflect on your own experiences of attraction and affection, can you practice Eshun's clarity about the difference between love and desire? When you feel drawn to someone, whether romantically or otherwise, can you examine whether your feelings honor their freedom and authentic path, or whether you are seeking to possess something about them for yourself? As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. Similarly, desire is never satisfied by possession, but only by the appreciation that can love without needing to own. In cultivating this understanding, we discover that true love always sets the beloved free. Let us now turn to a story about the most profound spiritual truth hiding in the most obvious place. This is the dialogue between Joshu and Nansen about the ordinary mind. In a quiet mountain monastery, where morning mist drifted between ancient pine trees and the sound of temple bells echoed across distant valleys, two masters engaged in a conversation that would illuminate the very heart of Zen understanding. Joshu, despite his own considerable wisdom and years of practice, approached his teacher Nansen with the earnestness of a sincere student, seeking to understand the deepest mysteries of existence. The two men sat facing each other in the temple's meditation hall, where countless seekers before them had wrestled with the same fundamental questions about the nature of awakening. Joshu's inquiry came from a place of genuine perplexity. After years of intensive practice, meditation, and study, he still felt uncertain about the very foundation of the spiritual path. "Master," Joshu began, with characteristic directness, "what exactly is the way? With all our practices and teachings, what are we ultimately seeking?" Nansen's response was immediate and surprisingly simple. "Ordinary mind is the way," he replied, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. This answer clearly puzzled Joshu, who had expected something more esoteric, more complex, more removed from everyday experience. "If ordinary mind is the way," he pressed further, "then should we direct ourselves toward cultivating it? Should we make it our spiritual goal?" Nansen shook his head gently. "If you direct yourself toward it, you immediately go away from it," he explained. "The very effort to attain ordinary mind makes it extraordinary and therefore no longer ordinary." Now Joshu found himself in what seemed like an impossible logical bind. "But Master, if we don't try to cultivate or attain anything, how can we ever know that this ordinary mind is actually the way? How can we recognize it without some form of practice or effort?" Nansen's final response cut through all philosophical complexity with razor-sharp clarity. "The way does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing turns the way into a concept, an object of understanding, which is illusion. Not knowing turns it into blankness, which misses its vibrant presence. If you truly realize the way without doubt, it becomes like the great void, so vast and boundless that it contains everything. How then could there be any distinction between right and wrong, sacred and mundane, ordinary and extraordinary?" At these words, something shifted fundamentally in Joshu's understanding. The seeking mind that had been grasping for answers suddenly relaxed, and he experienced a moment of complete clarity. Not the clarity of understanding something new, but the clarity of recognizing what had been present all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, there is nothing to seek and nothing to find. Everything is already here. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that what we seek through spiritual practice is not some special state of consciousness, but rather the ordinary awareness that is reading these words right now. Why do we struggle to accept that ordinary mind is the way? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning that spiritual truth must be extraordinary, mystical, or dramatically different from our everyday experience. We imagine enlightenment as a permanent state of bliss, cosmic consciousness, or supernatural abilities, when in reality it is simply the natural state of awareness without the overlay of seeking and striving. Our spiritual seeking often becomes its own obstacle. Like a person frantically searching for glasses while wearing them, we exhaust ourselves looking for something we already possess. The very effort to attain a special spiritual state creates the sense of separation between seeker and sought, between the ordinary self and some idealized awakened self. Consider how your own mind works in this very moment. Thoughts arise and pass away. Sensations appear in your body. Sounds reach your ears. Emotions flow through your awareness. This natural functioning of consciousness, without any special effort or concentration, is what Nansen calls ordinary mind. It is already enlightened, not because it achieves some particular state, but because it is the very space in which all states appear and dissolve. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way. just like now, without seeking anything, without grasping after the fruits of Zen, just this mind that thinks and feels and perceives, this is Buddha. This ordinariness is precisely what makes it so difficult to recognize. We keep looking past it for something more impressive. The great void that Nansen mentions is not empty space, but rather the spacious awareness in which all experiences arise. Like the sky that remains unchanged, whether filled with clouds or clear, this awareness remains constant through all the changing contents of experience. Joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion, peace and agitation, all appear and disappear within this unchanging background of ordinary awareness. This understanding revolutionizes our approach to spiritual practice. Instead of trying to achieve some special state, we learn to recognize the awareness that is already present. Instead of seeking to transcend ordinary experience, we discover the extraordinary nature of ordinariness itself. The sound of rain becomes as sacred as temple bells. Washing dishes becomes as profound as formal meditation. In Japanese aesthetics, there is a concept called wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. This appreciation for the ordinary and imperfect reflects the same understanding that Nansen points toward. The way is not found in perfected states, but in the natural flow of life exactly as it is. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being aware of these words, aware of your breathing, aware of the sounds around you, can you recognize this ordinary awareness as what you have been seeking all along? Can you relax the effort to become something other than what you already are? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The way is not a destination to reach, but the very ground you are already standing on. In accepting your ordinary mind as Buddha mind, you discover that the spiritual journey was never about going somewhere else, but about recognizing where you have always been. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual transmission. This is the tale of Bankai and the messenger. In the bustling capital city, where merchants haggled in crowded marketplaces and scholars debated in tea houses, the renowned Zen master Bankai had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the region for his profound insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Bankai maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to depart for his next destination, carefully folding his few possessions into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman approached him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone accustomed to moving in aristocratic circles, likely a retainer or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Venerable master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron, a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have detained him today. Would you consider postponing your departure by one day so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow?" Bankai, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and compassion, even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply. "I shall remain one more day." The master unpacked his bundle, and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he anticipated would be a meaningful encounter with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankai waited in his designated meeting room as the appointed time approached, but instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his features. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring regrettable news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed, matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your instruction on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand what is the true nature of consciousness and how can one realize it directly. If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it. Bankai listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and compassionate. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-intentioned messenger, and the profound impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankai spoke with characteristic simplicity and directness. "This matter of Zen is difficult to convey, even through direct question and answer between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed, impossible, to transmit through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be." Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, embodying the very teaching he had just articulated. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting elaboration or alternative suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and withdrew from the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This profound truth reveals itself in Bankai's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by proxy. Spiritual awakening cannot be transmitted second-hand because it is not information but transformation. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge that can be collected and conveyed through intermediaries? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be adequately described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual inquiry. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it conceptually, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Consider how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected rather than truth to be embodied. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen master Dogen taught, To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This paradox points to the heart of why spiritual transmission requires direct engagement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through accumulating knowledge, but through intimate investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, maintaining the illusion that we are separate observers studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or transmitted because we are expressions of it. Bankei's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often conveys what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them conceptually. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that authentic teaching points students toward their own direct experience, rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and sensations appear, can you investigate this awareness directly, rather than through concepts? Can you be present to your experience, rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with diligence. The path to freedom cannot be walked by proxy. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been, but perhaps never clearly seen. Let us now explore a story about the invisible burdens we carry through life. This is the tale of the empty backpack. In a serene monastery garden, where morning dew glistened on carefully tended paths, a young seeker approached his teacher with a question weighing heavily on his heart. His eyes reflected both determination and confusion as he bowed respectfully. "Master," he said, "I wish to understand my path on earth better. Why do I seem to carry my past and relive it again and again? Why can't I get past my past?" The master studied the young man with compassionate eyes, then gestured toward an intricate maze of translucent silk panels shimmering in the garden's filtered sunlight. "Go forward into the maze," he said, reaching for a leather backpack. "But carry this as you walk. It will help you stay focused. Be careful though, as it is quite heavy." The young man accepted the backpack, initially surprised by how easily the master handed it over. But the moment it settled into his grasp, he gasped. The weight was extraordinary, forcing him to bend forward as he struggled toward the maze. Inside the silken labyrinth, he immediately encountered solid walls. Through the translucent material, he could see other seekers navigating their paths like distant ghosts. No matter which direction he turned, every path seemed blocked. Exhausted, he sat down to think. "Others are clearly ahead of me," he thought. "Should I cheat and crawl under the silk?" After wrestling with these thoughts, he chose integrity. As he stood with renewed resolve, an opening magically appeared. Progress felt rewarding until he faced another wall. This time, good intentions yielded no results. The backpack's weight became unbearable, cutting into his shoulders. What could be so heavy yet feel so soft? Overcome with curiosity, he removed the pack and peered inside. It was completely empty. Yet, when he lifted it again, the weight remained undeniable. As he placed it back on his shoulders, a voice whispered clearly, "Look inside of you, young man, for the weight lies there." Suddenly, memories flooded his consciousness. His childhood tormentors, accumulated hurts and resentments carried for years. As he relived each painful experience, the backpack grew heavier. Then understanding dawned. I am the weight. I carry the burden of that which troubles me. With this insight, he began the work of forgiveness. I forgive you wherever you are, he found himself saying. Immediately the pack lightened and new pathways opened. As sunlight warmed his face and he remembered moments of love, the weight continued diminishing until the backpack felt weightless. Finally, surrounded by solid silk walls, he sat in meditation. I am the light and the way. I recognize that I was the impediment, not anyone else. At these words, his feet began rising from the earth. He floated above the maze, seeing how others remained trapped by darkness in their own packs. With a thought, he found himself beside his teacher outside the labyrinth. "Master," he said, his face radiant, "I discovered that my darkness caused my weight, and my lightness freed me to fly." The master smiled knowingly. "What do you feel, young one? Do you feel freed?" Without waiting for an answer, he walked away. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound truth revealed in the empty backpack story. We are the creators of our own burdens. What emerges from this tale is recognition that our past does not imprison us. Our relationship to our past does. The young seeker discovered that suffering came not from what others had done, but from his unwillingness to release those experiences. The empty backpack represents the invisible weight of unprocessed emotions and unhealed wounds we carry through life. Why do we cling so tenaciously to our pain? First is our identification with wounds. We derive identity from grievances, thinking, I am someone who was wronged, rather than, I experienced wronging but am not defined by it. Second is our addiction to the familiar. Even painful emotions become comfortable because they're known. Third is our misunderstanding of forgiveness, believing it means condoning harmful behavior rather than freeing ourselves from resentment's prison. Consider how this plays out daily. The colleague who received credit for your idea still triggers anger. The parent who criticized you decades ago still influences your self-talk. Each is an invisible item in your backpack, weighing you down. Zen teacher Jack Cornfield taught, forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a different past. We cannot change what happened, but we can change our relationship to what happened. The energy spent maintaining grievances could be redirected toward creating the life we actually want. The floating represents lightness available when we release psychological burdens. This isn't about bypassing pain, but processing experiences fully and choosing freedom over familiarity, growth over grievance. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, what invisible weight might you be carrying? Perhaps it's time to examine what you've been holding on to and ask, does this serve my highest good, or is it time to set it down? As the Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. The path to freedom begins with radical self-forgiveness and willingness to travel light through life's inevitable challenges. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about perception's power to create reality. This is the tale of the eggplant in the dark. In a mountain monastery where silence was treasured, there lived a monk renowned for strict adherence to Buddhist precepts. His devotion was unwavering, his meditation exemplary, his commitment to non-violence absolute. For years, he had walked the path with careful attention to every rule, finding comfort in structure and certainty. One moonless night, returning from evening meditation, he walked slowly along the garden path to his quarters. The darkness was complete, broken only by faint outlines of familiar landmarks. He knew this path intimately, yet tonight something felt different. Suddenly, his foot came down on something soft and yielding. The object made a distinct squishing sound that pierced the quiet like a bell. The monk froze, his heart racing as his mind conjured the most likely explanation. He had stepped on an egg-bearing frog. The realization struck like a physical blow. The first precept forbids taking life, and here he was, a dedicated practitioner, having just killed a pregnant creature. Not only had he taken one life, but potentially dozens. Horror washed over him in waves. His hands trembled as he knelt in darkness, trying to determine what happened, but the night was too black to see. His mind spun with questions and recriminations. How could he have been so careless? Was this a spiritual test he had failed catastrophically? Sleep became impossible. When he finally lay down, his mind churned with guilt and self-doubt. In his dreams, hundreds of frogs appeared, their eyes accusatory, demanding justice for their fallen mother and unborn siblings. They surrounded him, voices rising in condemnation that echoed through his consciousness. The monk woke repeatedly, each time remembering anew what he believed he had done. His carefully cultivated peace was shattered, replaced by torment that grew stronger with each passing hour. He questioned not only this moment, but his entire spiritual practice. As dawn broke, painting the monastery gardens in soft golden light, the monk returned to face the reality of his actions. His steps were heavy with dread as he approached the familiar path. But when morning light revealed the truth, the monk stopped in complete astonishment. There lay not the remains of a frog, but an overripe eggplant that had fallen from the monastery garden. The purple vegetable had split open when he stepped on it, creating the squishing sound that triggered his night of anguish. In that moment of recognition, something extraordinary happened. The monk felt a sudden shift in understanding that went far beyond relief. For the first time in years of study, he truly grasped the teaching that there is no objective world. His entire night of suffering had been created not by external reality, but by his mind's interpretation of an ambiguous experience. Standing in the garden, looking at the harmless eggplant, the monk finally understood how to practice Zen. It wasn't about perfect adherence to rules or avoiding all error. It was about seeing clearly, without the distortions of assumption and mental elaboration. The Buddha once said, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This teaching captures what the monk discovered. Our experience of reality is largely created by mental interpretations rather than objective circumstances. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully perceptions shape emotional reality. The monk's actual experience was minimal, stepping on something soft in darkness. Everything that followed was generated entirely by his mind's interpretation of that simple sensory event. Why do we construct elaborate stories from incomplete information? Our minds evolved to make rapid assessments for survival, often filling gaps with worst-case scenarios. This mental habit served our ancestors well when danger was immediate and physical, but creates unnecessary suffering when applied to modern psychological situations. Consider how often you step on metaphorical eggplants in the dark. Your friend doesn't return your text immediately, and you assume you've offended them. A colleague seems distant in a meeting, and you convince yourself they're angry about your presentation. Your partner comes home quieter than usual, and you imagine relationship problems that may exist only in your worried mind. Each scenario follows the same pattern: ambiguous sensory input, followed by mental interpretation, followed by emotional reaction to the interpretation rather than the actual event. We suffer not from what happens, but from what we think about what happens. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." The monk had become an expert in following rules, but a beginner in seeing clearly. His expertise actually became a limitation when it caused him to jump to conclusions based on preconceptions. This story invites us to examine our tendency toward premature interpretation. How often do we create our own nightmares by assuming the worst about ambiguous situations? How much daily stress comes from responding to imagined scenarios rather than actual circumstances? Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable ambiguities of human interaction, can you remember the monk and the eggplant? When your mind begins constructing stories about unclear situations, can you step back and ask, what do I actually know for certain, and what am I adding through interpretation? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, doubt everything, find your own light. The monk's awakening came not from following external rules more perfectly, but from discovering the clarity that was always available within him. Now, let us turn to a tale about the difference between wisdom and words that attempt to contain it. This is the story of the pointing finger. In a peaceful valley monastery where evening mist gathered among ancient pines, a beloved Zen teacher enjoyed his daily ritual of walking with his faithful dog. The animal's joy was infectious, bounding ahead to retrieve sticks and returning with tail wagging, eyes bright with simple happiness. On this particular evening, the teacher invited one of his most promising students to join them. The young man was brilliant, his mind sharp as a blade and equally capable of cutting through complex philosophical concepts. Yet this very intelligence had become a source of suffering. The more he studied Buddhist texts, the more contradictions he discovered. His bright mind seemed to be creating obstacles rather than clearing them. As they walked along the familiar trail, the student voiced his frustration. "Master, I struggle with contradictions in our teachings. Some texts speak of emptiness, others of Buddha nature. Some emphasize effort, others effortless being. How can these opposing instructions both be true?" The teacher listened with patient attention. He understood that intellectual brilliance could become a trap when the mind tried to grasp truth like solving a mathematical equation. Truth required a different kind of knowing altogether. "You must understand," the teacher said gently, "that words are only guideposts. Never let words or symbols get in the way of truth. Here, I'll show you." The teacher called his dog, who came running with eager enthusiasm. The full moon hung low in the darkening sky, its silver light beginning to emerge as daylight faded. The teacher pointed directly at the luminous orb and spoke to his pet with the same tone he used for their usual games. "Fetch me the moon," he commanded. his finger extended clearly toward the celestial body. The dog's response was immediate and predictable, his gaze fixed intently on the teacher's outstretched finger, following its movement with focused attention he typically reserved for thrown sticks. The animal's entire being concentrated on the pointing digit, completely oblivious to the moon hanging magnificently above. The teacher turned to his confused student with a knowing smile. "Where is my dog looking?" The student observed the scene with growing awareness. "He's looking at your finger," he replied, beginning to sense the deeper lesson. "Exactly," the teacher confirmed. "Don't be like my dog. Don't confuse the pointing finger with the thing being pointed at. All our Buddhist words are only guideposts. Every person must fight their way through other people's words to find their own truth." The young student stood in silence, feeling something shift in his understanding. The moon shone overhead, its light touching everything equally regardless of whether anyone pointed at it. The truth was like that moon, present and luminous, independent of any description or analysis. As the Buddha observed, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. This teaching addresses the exact confusion that plagued the bright student, mistaking concepts about truth for truth itself. Here we discover how intellectual understanding, while valuable, can become a barrier when we rely on it exclusively. The student's brilliant mind was capable of analyzing and comparing teachings, but analysis alone cannot deliver the direct experience that spiritual awakening requires. Like the dog fixated on the finger, he had become so focused on examining words and concepts that he missed the reality they attempted to indicate. Why do we become trapped in conceptual understanding? The thinking mind operates through division and comparison, understanding by breaking things into categories. But ultimate truth transcends these dualistic distinctions. It cannot be captured in concepts any more than the moon can be held in a photograph. This creates what Zen calls the great doubt, the frustrating recognition that our usual ways of knowing are inadequate for the most important questions. Different teachings use different words to point toward the same ineffable reality, like multiple fingers pointing at the same moon from various angles. Consider how this pattern manifests in spiritual seeking. We collect teachings like treasures, memorizing quotes from masters, analyzing meditation techniques, comparing different traditions. All of this can be valuable, but becomes problematic when we mistake accumulation of spiritual knowledge for spiritual development itself. Zen teacher D.T. Suzuki said, "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon." This applies not only to spiritual teachings, but to all areas where we confuse the map for the territory. In relationships, we can become so focused on analyzing the relationship that we lose touch with the actual experience of loving. In nature, we can become so busy photographing that we miss the immediate wonder of simply being present. The moon represents what Zen calls our original nature, the awareness that exists prior to all concepts and categories. This awareness is always present, just as the moon exists whether or not anyone points at it. It doesn't need to be created or achieved, only recognized. This doesn't mean abandoning study or intellectual understanding. The teacher himself used words and concepts to convey his lesson. Rather, it means holding our conceptual knowledge lightly, using it as a tool rather than an end goal. Like a ladder that helps us reach a roof, spiritual teachings can be discarded once they've served their purpose. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable complexity of modern life, can you distinguish between the pointing fingers and what they point toward? When you study spiritual teachings or seek guidance, can you remember that words are merely fingers pointing at the moon of your own innate wisdom? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, work out your salvation with diligence. The work involves not just understanding teachings intellectually, but moving through them to the reality they indicate. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the intensity required for genuine spiritual awakening. This is the tale of the drowning lesson. Beside a crystal-clear mountain river, where water flowed over smooth stones with the endless song of moving current, a hermit had established his practice. For years, he had lived in solitude, finding in the rhythm of flowing water and changing seasons a perfect mirror for the movements of his own consciousness. One morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the canopy and the air carried the fresh scent of mountain laurel, a young man approached the hermit's simple dwelling. The seeker had traveled far, his clothing dusty from the journey, his face earnest with spiritual longing. "Master," the young man said, bowing respectfully, "I wish to become your disciple." The hermit looked up from his contemplation, studying the newcomer with eyes that had grown accustomed to reading the subtle signs of genuine versus superficial spiritual interest. "Why?" the hermit replied simply. The young man paused, considering his answer carefully. "Because I want to find God," he said finally, believing this to be the most noble response. What happened next took the seeker completely by surprise. Without warning, the hermit sprang to his feet, grabbed the young man by the scruff of his neck, and dragged him toward the river. Before the stunned visitor could protest, he found himself being pushed into the clear, cold water. The hermit's strong hands forced the young man's head beneath the surface and held him there. Panic set in immediately. The seeker's lungs began to burn as his oxygen depleted. He kicked and struggled with increasing desperation, his arms flailing as he fought to break free. Every second felt like an eternity as his body screamed for air. Nothing existed except the urgent, overwhelming need to breathe. After what seemed like a lifetime, but was probably only a minute, the hermit finally pulled the gasping young man up out of the water. The seeker coughed violently, water streaming from his nose and mouth as he struggled to fill his lungs with precious air. His entire body shook from cold, shock, and the aftermath of near drowning. When his breathing finally normalized, the hermit spoke again, his voice carrying a different quality, still gentle, but charged with unmistakable intensity. "Tell me," he said, watching the young man's face carefully, "what did you want most of all when you were underwater?" The answer came without hesitation, raw and honest. "Air!" The hermit nodded slowly, satisfied that his lesson had found its mark. "Very well," he said. "Go home and come back to me when you want God as much as you just wanted air." Without another word, the hermit turned and walked back to his place of meditation, leaving the dripping, shaken young man to contemplate the profound teaching he had just received. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Yet this wisdom must be ignited by genuine spiritual fire, not merely intellectual interest. the hermit's dramatic teaching illuminates the difference between casual spiritual curiosity and the total commitment that authentic awakening requires. What emerges from this story is recognition that spiritual seeking demands the same intensity and urgency we naturally bring to physical survival. The young seeker thought he wanted God, but his desire was still within the realm of preference rather than necessity. He wanted spiritual awakening as an addition to life rather than as life itself. Why do we approach spiritual development with tentative commitment? First is our attachment to comfort and the familiar. Genuine transformation requires letting go of who we think we are, which the ego experiences as death. Second is our misunderstanding of what spiritual seeking entails. Popular culture presents awakening as a pleasant expansion, but traditional teachings describe it as a dismantling of illusion. Third is our tendency to compartmentalize spirituality as one area among others, rather than a complete reorientation of our relationship to existence. Consider how this plays out in contemporary seeking. We collect techniques like trophies, jumping from meditation retreats to healing workshops, to consciousness conferences, accumulating experiences without allowing any single practice to fundamentally transform us. We want the insurance policy of spiritual development without paying the premium of total dedication. The drowning experience represents what mystics call the dark night of the soul. Moments when our usual sources of identity and security are stripped away. In such moments, we discover what we truly value most deeply. This is the quality of desire that spiritual awakening requires. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck wrote, "Practice is not about achieving some special state. Practice is about being willing to die to who you think you are." The hermit's lesson brought the young seeker face to face with this death-like quality of authentic spiritual work. This intensity doesn't mean spiritual practice should be grim. Rather, it means bringing the same passionate engagement to inner development that we naturally bring to whatever we value most deeply. A musician practicing for Carnegie Hall, a scientist pursuing a breakthrough, all demonstrate the focused dedication that spiritual awakening requires. The river represents the flow of ordinary consciousness, where we spend most of our time skimming along the surface. Being pushed underwater symbolizes the necessity of going deeper into the unconscious patterns that actually govern our lives. This depth work requires the same survival level intensity the seeker experienced when deprived of air. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual aspirations, can you honestly assess the quality of your desire? Is your seeking driven by curiosity and preference, or by necessity? What would it mean to want truth as much as you want your next breath? As the Buddha taught, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The path to awakening lies not in accumulating more spiritual experiences, but in bringing the totality of our being to whatever practice we choose. Our next story reveals a profound truth about how attachment can poison the very thing we claim to love. This is the tale of the chrysanthemum garden. In the countryside of ancient Japan, where autumn mists drifted through carefully manicured estates, there lived a wealthy baron whose passion bordered on obsession. His mansion stood proudly among rolling hills, but it was the rear garden that captured his heart completely. There, row upon row of chrysanthemums bloomed in magnificent splendor, their colors ranging from deep purple to golden yellow to pristine white. The baron devoted endless hours to cultivating these flowers, studying each variety with scholarly intensity, nurturing each plant with parental tenderness. His knowledge was encyclopedic, his dedication absolute. Yet this very devotion had transformed from love into something darker. The Baron paid more attention to his chrysanthemums than to his wife and children. His household lived in constant fear, knowing that a single misstep near the precious flowers could result in severe punishment. Many retainers had felt his wrath for accidentally breaking off a blossom. The atmosphere had become oppressive, filled with anxiety and resentment. One autumn day, disaster struck. A faithful retainer, while hurrying to complete his duties, accidentally brushed against a prized chrysanthemum, breaking off its perfect bloom. When the Baron discovered the damaged flower, his rage was volcanic. "Confinement!" he roared. The retainer was immediately imprisoned for this innocent accident. But the punishment felt so disproportionate that the retainer's shame transformed into desperate anger. According to the warrior code, he resolved to protest through seppuku, ritual disembowelment, preferring death to such humiliation over a mere flower. Word of this tragedy reached Zen Master Sengai, a teacher known for his wisdom and compassion. Understanding that a man's life hung in the balance over botanical beauty, Sengai hastened to the estate and successfully prevented the suicide. But the master knew that saving one life would not solve the deeper problem. Sengai devised a radical solution. On a rainy night, when the chrysanthemums were at their most glorious peak, he sneaked into the Baron's garden carrying a sharp sickle. Working methodically in the darkness, he cut down every single chrysanthemum, hundreds of flowers representing years of cultivation. The sound awakened the Baron, who rushed to his window and saw a shadowy figure in his beloved garden. Grabbing his sword, he ran outside in alarm, demanding to know what this intruder was doing. Sengai stood calmly amid the devastation, surrounded by fallen blooms. "Even weeds like this eventually become rank if they are not cut," he replied with perfect equanimity. In that moment, the Baron's obsession shattered like breaking glass. Seeing his flowers reduced to mere weeds in the master's eyes, he suddenly understood the distortion in his perception. It was like awakening from a fevered dream. From that night forward, the Baron never raised chrysanthemums again. The Buddha taught, attachment is the root of suffering. This ancient wisdom illuminates what the Baron discovered through Sengai's dramatic intervention. When we cling too tightly to anything, even beautiful things, we transform love into possession and beauty into burden. This profound truth reveals itself in the way attachment corrupts the very thing we claim to cherish. The Baron genuinely loved chrysanthemums, but his attachment had poisoned that love, turning appreciation into obsession, care into control, and beauty into a source of fear for everyone around him. Why do we confuse love with possession? Buddhism explains that the ego mind seeks security through control, attempting to make permanent what is inherently impermanent. True love appreciates without grasping, enjoys without owning, cares without controlling. But attachment love tries to freeze beauty in place, to make the beloved an extension of our own identity. Consider how this pattern manifests in modern relationships. Parents who love their children so intensely that they become controlling, suffocating the very growth they claim to support. Partners who love so possessively that they create jealousy and mistrust. Collectors who become so attached to possessions that they lose the joy of experiencing what they own. The chrysanthemums represent anything we elevate beyond its proper place in the natural order. This might be our career success, our physical appearance, our spiritual achievements, or our carefully curated lifestyle. When we become too attached, we create suffering not only for ourselves, but for everyone in our orbit. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the delicate balance between appreciation and attachment. We can love something fully while holding it lightly, caring deeply while remaining unattached to outcomes. Sengai's radical action demonstrates the sometimes shocking medicine required to break through deep-seated attachment patterns. Sometimes we need external circumstances to strip away what we're clinging to before we can see clearly. Loss, disappointment, and impermanence, while painful, often serve as teachers, revealing the difference between genuine love and possessive attachment. Notice that the Baron doesn't simply moderate his gardening, he stops completely. This suggests that sometimes the most skillful response to attachment is temporary, complete withdrawal until we can relate to the object of attachment with greater freedom and wisdom. Tonight, as you reflect on your own life, what might be your chrysanthemum garden? What do you love so intensely that it creates stress, control, or suffering for yourself or others? Can you imagine appreciating these things fully while holding them more lightly? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. True love sets free what it cherishes, trusting in the natural flow of arising and passing away. Let us now turn to a story about the relationship between outer circumstances and inner cultivation. This is the tale of the horse and the mind. In a remote mountain region where execution grounds served as sobering reminders of mortality, Zen master Bankei sought to test the depth of his spiritual realization. For several nights, he sat in meditation beneath a wooden crucifix, using the proximity of death to penetrate more deeply into the nature of existence. After completing this intense retreat, Bankei made his way to a nearby area where he could rest. He found a peaceful spot on an embankment surrounding a horse corral, where he lay down to continue his contemplation under the open sky. As he rested there, absorbed in profound silence, a harsh sound shattered his peace. From within the corral came the violent sounds of a warrior brutally beating his horse. The animal's cries mixed with the sharp crack of a whip and angry shouts of a man losing control. Master Bankei observed this scene with growing concern. The warrior was clearly frustrated, taking out his inner turmoil on the innocent animal. Each blow seemed to make the horse more agitated rather than more compliant, creating a vicious cycle of violence and resistance. Unable to remain silent, Bankei called out from his position, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The warrior, absorbed in rage, ignored the interruption and continued his harsh treatment. The beating intensified, and so did Bankei's concern for both the animal and the man degrading himself through such cruelty. "Hey!" Bankei called out again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years cultivating inner peace. "What do you think you are doing?" Still the warrior continued, lost in frustration and anger. The horse became increasingly panicked, which only seemed to fuel the man's determination to force compliance through violence. A third time, Bankei's voice rang out, "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" This time, something in the master's tone penetrated the warrior's rage. The man stopped his beating, climbed down from his horse, and approached the embankment. As he drew closer, his expression changed. There was something about this stranger that commanded respect. a quality of presence that spoke of deep inner development. "You were yelling at me," the warrior said, his voice still carrying traces of anger but now mixed with curiosity. "Do you have something to tell me?" Bankai looked at the man with compassion, seeing not an enemy, but someone caught in the same cycles of frustration that trap us all. His response was simple, yet profound. Rather than beat your horse for being unruly, why not chastise yourself and train your own mind right? The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge connecting two very different approaches to dealing with difficulty. The warrior had been trying to solve his problem through external force and control. Bankai was pointing to an entirely different possibility. As the Buddha observed, conquer anger with non-anger, conquer badness with goodness, conquer meanness with generosity, conquer dishonesty with truth. This teaching captures the essence of what Bankai offered the frustrated warrior, the recognition that our external struggles mirror our internal state. What emerges from this story is the profound insight that we cannot successfully force the world to conform to our expectations through aggression or control. The warrior's approach, beating the horse into submission, represents how we often try to manage difficult circumstances in our own lives. We become frustrated with external conditions and respond with force, criticism, or manipulation, never recognizing that the real work lies within. Why do we instinctively blame external circumstances for our frustration? Buddhist psychology explains that the untrained mind seeks to maintain its comfort by controlling its environment rather than developing the flexibility to respond skillfully to whatever arises. This creates what Zen calls pushing the river, exhausting ourselves, trying to force reality to match our preferences. Consider how this pattern manifests in daily life. The computer that crashes during an important project becomes the target of our anger, when the real issue is our attachment to having technology work perfectly. The traffic jam that makes us late triggers road rage, when the actual problem is our expectation that travel should always be smooth. The family member who doesn't respond to our advice becomes the focus of our frustration, when the deeper issue is our need to control others' choices. In each case, we're like the warrior beating the horse, applying force to external circumstances, while ignoring the internal conditions that create our suffering. The horse represents the uncontrollable aspects of life, other people's behavior, natural events, technological failures, and the inherent unpredictability of existence. Zen teacher Pema Chodron writes, "You are the sky, everything else is just the weather." This points to the same truth Bankai offered the warrior. Instead of trying to control the weather of external circumstances, we can develop the spacious awareness that remains calm regardless of conditions. The real training involves learning to work with our own minds, rather than trying to force compliance from the world around us. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting harmful situations, but rather approaching challenges from a place of inner stability rather than reactive frustration. Buddhist practice offers specific techniques for this internal training. Mindfulness meditation teaches us to observe our reactive patterns without being swept away by them. Loving kindness practice develops compassion for ourselves and others when things don't go as planned. Contemplation of impermanence helps us accept the changeable nature of all conditions. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable frustrations of daily life, can you remember Bankai's teaching? When you find yourself wanting to beat the horse of difficult circumstances, can you pause and ask, what would it mean to train my own mind instead? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. The path to peace lies not in conquering external conditions, but in cultivating the inner qualities that remain stable regardless of what the world presents. Now let us explore a story about the difference between superficial understanding and lived wisdom. This is the tale of following the stream. In the heart of a vast wilderness, where towering pines stretch toward endless sky, two city dwellers found themselves completely lost. They had ventured into the high timber for what was supposed to be a simple day hike, but overconfidence and poor preparation had led them far from any familiar trail. For a day and a night, they wandered through the dense forest, their anxiety growing with each passing hour. The comfortable urban world they knew seemed impossibly distant. Every tree looked the same. Every path led to another confusing intersection, and their sense of direction had completely abandoned them. Just as panic was beginning to set in, they stumbled upon an old hermit sitting peacefully beside a small clearing. His weathered face spoke of years spent in solitude, and his calm presence offered immediate comfort to the desperate travelers. "How do we find our way back to civilization?" they asked urgently, their voices carrying the desperation of people who had exhausted their own resources. The hermit looked at them with kind eyes that seemed to see more than their immediate predicament. "I could tell you," he replied thoughtfully, "but you'd still get lost." The two men exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the straightforward directions they had hoped for. "What should we do?" they asked, their frustration evident. "Go with the flow," the hermit answered simply. "I beg your pardon?" one of them responded, clearly expecting something more practical and specific. The hermit smiled and gestured toward a small stream that bubbled cheerfully through the clearing. "Go with the flow. You see that stream over there? Just follow it. Streams go into creeks, and creeks go into rivers, and rivers go through towns. Also, along the way, you'll have water to drink and berries to eat." This practical advice made immediate sense to the lost travelers. Following water downstream was indeed a reliable way to find human settlements, and the stream would provide essential resources they needed for survival during their journey. But one of the men, perhaps having heard spiritual teachings before, asked a deeper question. "Is that what Zen people mean when they say, 'go with the flow'?" The hermit paused for a moment, considering this question with the same careful attention he had given their practical need for directions. "Yes and no," he replied enigmatically, and then continued along his way, leaving the two men to find their own understanding of his words. The Buddha once said, "If you understand, things are just as they are. If you do not understand, things are just as they are." This teaching points to the layered nature of wisdom that the hermit embodied in his response to the lost travelers. The deeper teaching here shows us how authentic spiritual guidance operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The hermit's advice was both completely practical and profoundly metaphorical. On the surface level, following the stream was simply good wilderness survival strategy. On a deeper level, it represented the entire approach to living that Zen encourages. Why did the hermit say the travelers would still get lost even if he gave them directions? This points to a fundamental truth about the difference between receiving information and developing wisdom. External directions can guide us temporarily, but they don't develop our inner capacity for navigation. Real wisdom involves learning to read the natural signs and flow with the underlying currents of life itself. Consider how this applies to our spiritual seeking. We often approach teachers and teachings looking for specific directions. Tell me exactly what to do to become enlightened. Give me the precise meditation technique that will solve my problems. But this approach, while understandable, misses the deeper point. True spiritual guidance doesn't provide a map, but teaches us how to read the territory. It doesn't give us someone else's answers, but helps us develop the capacity to find our own. Like the stream that naturally knows its way to the ocean, we each have an innate wisdom that can guide us if we learn to trust and follow it. The phrase "go with the flow" has become so common in popular culture that it's almost lost its meaning, often interpreted as passive resignation or lack of direction. But the hermit's yes and no response points to a more nuanced understanding. True flowing isn't about drifting aimlessly, but about aligning our efforts with the natural currents of wisdom and compassion. The stream represents the Tao, the natural way that underlies all existence. When we align ourselves with this deeper flow, our actions become effortless and effective. We stop pushing against reality and learn to work with the grain of existence rather than against it. But this requires developing a different kind of intelligence than our usual problem-solving mind. The travelers wanted explicit directions because that's how the rational mind works, through clear, step-by-step instructions. But the deeper intelligence the hermit was pointing toward operates more like intuition, sensing the right direction moment by moment rather than following a predetermined plan. This is why contemplative traditions emphasize present moment awareness. The stream doesn't need to know where the ocean is. It simply flows in the direction that feels natural right now. Similarly, when we develop moment-to-moment mindfulness, we can sense the appropriate response to each situation without needing to figure out the entire journey in advance. Tonight, as you navigate the complexities of your own life, can you sense the streams of natural wisdom flowing beneath the surface of your daily concerns? What would it mean to trust that deeper current while still attending responsibly to practical necessities? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. The hermit's guidance was like lighting a candle in the travelers' minds, providing not just directions, but a way of approaching life that could serve them in countless future situations. Let us continue on our journey with a story about how our inner landscape shapes our outer experience. This is the tale of the two towns. In a bustling marketplace where merchants hawked their wares and travelers stopped to rest on their journeys, a wise Zen master had established a modest tea stall. People came not only for refreshment, but for the master's reputation for offering practical wisdom to those facing life's transitions and uncertainties. On this particular day, two different men approached the master's stall, each carrying the same question but embodying very different energies. Both were considering major life changes. Both were strangers to this place, and both sought guidance about whether this town might become their new home. The first man arrived with a tense expression, his shoulders carrying the weight of accumulated frustrations. As he approached the tea stall, his eyes darted around suspiciously, already assessing and finding fault with what he observed. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he announced without preamble. "What's it like?" The Zen master looked at the man with gentle attention, noting not just his words, but the quality of energy he brought to the question. Rather than offering immediate description, the master asked his own question. "What was your old town like?" The first man's response came quickly, as if he had rehearsed these complaints many times. "It was dreadful," he said with obvious bitterness. "Everyone was hateful and unfriendly. The neighbors were inconsiderate, the shopkeepers were rude, and the whole place was full of selfish, unpleasant people. I couldn't stand it there anymore." The master nodded thoughtfully, his expression remaining compassionate despite the negativity pouring from his visitor. "This town is very much the same," he replied simply. "I don't think you should move here." The first man's face darkened with disappointment and frustration. Without another word, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath about how this place was probably just as bad as everywhere else. Shortly after the first man departed, the second traveler approached the tea stall. His manner was notably different, relaxed, curious, and open. His eyes took in the surroundings with appreciation rather than judgment, and when he smiled at the master, it seemed to come from a place of genuine warmth. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he said cheerfully. "What's it like?" The master regarded the second visitor with the same careful attention he had given the first, again choosing to learn more before offering his assessment. "What was your old town like?" he asked. The second man's face lit up as he considered the question. "It was wonderful," he said with obvious fondness. "Everyone was so friendly and helpful. My neighbors looked out for each other. The local merchants knew everyone by name, and there was a real sense of community. I was very happy there. I'm only considering a change because I'm looking for new adventures and opportunities." The master smiled knowingly. "This town is very much the same," he told the second man. "I think you will like it here very much." The second man's face broke into a delighted grin. He thanked the master warmly and walked away with a spring in his step, already seeing possibilities and connections in his new environment. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. This ancient insight illuminates the profound truth demonstrated by the master's seemingly contradictory responses to the two travelers. Here we discover one of the most fundamental principles of human experience. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are. The master gave identical answers to both men because he recognized that their questions revealed far more about their internal states than about their external circumstances. Why do some people find community and kindness wherever they go, while others encounter hostility and disappointment in the same environments? Buddhist psychology explains that our perceptual filters, shaped by our habitual mental patterns, literally create our experienced reality. We notice evidence that confirms our existing beliefs while filtering out information that contradicts them. The first man carried what modern psychology might call a negative attribution bias, the tendency to interpret ambiguous situations in the most negative possible way. His mind was like a magnet for negative experiences, not because the world was inherently hostile, but because that's what he was conditioned to see. The second man demonstrated the opposite pattern, a generous attribution style that assumed the best in others and looked for positive connections. His mind was attuned to kindness and possibility. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Two people can work in the same office and have completely different experiences. One sees politics, competition, and dysfunction everywhere. The other finds mentorship, collaboration, and growth opportunities in the same environment. This doesn't mean that objective conditions don't matter or that all experiences are equally positive. Rather, it points to the enormous influence our mental habits have on shaping our lived reality. As Zen teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn says, "Wherever you go, there you are. We carry our internal weather with us, and it colors everything we encounter." The master's wisdom lay in recognizing that no external change of location could solve the first man's problem. If he moved to this town with the same negative perceptual filters, he would recreate the same disappointing experiences he was trying to escape. This insight has profound implications for how we approach life changes and problem solving. Often, when we're unhappy with our circumstances, our first instinct is to change the external conditions. But if we don't address the internal patterns that created our dissatisfaction, we simply recreate similar problems in new settings. But this principle works in both directions. When we cultivate mental habits of appreciation, curiosity, and goodwill, we begin to notice more evidence supporting those perspectives. The world doesn't magically change, but our capacity to see its positive qualities expands dramatically. Tonight, as you reflect on your own experiences of community, work, and relationships, can you notice the interpretive lens through which you typically view these interactions? Are you more like the first traveler, scanning for problems and disappointments, or the second, looking for connection and possibility? As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything, what you think you become. The most powerful tool for transforming our external experience lies not in changing our circumstances, but in changing the quality of awareness we bring to whatever circumstances we encounter. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool," they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle," they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow." But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior! Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change." Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax right now and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about transforming our relationship with suffering. This is the tale of the salt and the lake. In a quiet monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived an aging master renowned for his patience and wisdom. Among his students was a young apprentice whose heart had become heavy with complaints about life's difficulties. Each morning, the apprentice would arrive with fresh grievances. "Master, why is life so hard? Yesterday my meditation was disturbed by noise. Today my back aches from the hard floor. When will this suffering end?" His voice carried the weight of someone who had catalogued every small discomfort until they had grown into an overwhelming burden. The master listened with infinite patience, but as days turned to weeks, he recognized that words alone would not shift his student's perspective. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight streamed through their simple dwelling, the master made an unusual request. "My dear student," he said gently, "I need you to go to the kitchen and bring me some salt. Just a handful will suffice." The apprentice, puzzled by this simple task, nonetheless obeyed. He returned with cupped palms containing coarse white crystals. "Now," the master instructed, producing a small glass of water, "place all of that salt into this glass and drink it." The young man hesitated. "Master, that seems like far too much salt for such a small amount of water." "Trust the process," the master replied. "Drink." The apprentice poured the salt into the glass, watching the crystals dissolve into a cloudy, unappetizing mixture. He lifted it to his lips and took a large gulp, immediately grimacing as the intensely bitter taste filled his mouth. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Bitter," the apprentice spat. "Terribly, overwhelmingly bitter. I can barely stand it." The master chuckled softly. "Excellent. Now bring that same amount of salt and come with me." Together, they walked in contemplative silence until they reached the shores of a pristine mountain lake. The water stretched before them like a mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where earth ended and heaven began. "Now," the master said, "place this handful of salt into the lake." The apprentice waded into the shallow water and opened his hands, watching as the salt crystals scattered across the lake's surface, quickly dissolving without leaving any visible trace. "Drink from the lake," the master instructed. The young man cupped the lake water in his hands and brought it to his lips. The water was clean, refreshing, with the pure taste of mountain streams. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Much fresher," the apprentice replied, genuinely surprised. "Clean and pure." "Do you taste the salt?" the master inquired gently. The student paused, paying careful attention. "No," he said slowly. "I don't taste any salt at all." The master sat beside his student on a smooth stone at the water's edge. His weathered hands reached out to clasp the young man's hands in profound tenderness. "My dear student," the master said, "the pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in existence remains constant. But the amount of bitterness we experience depends entirely on the container we put that pain into." The apprentice listened with a new understanding. "When you are in pain," the master continued, "the only thing you can truly control is your response. You can choose to be a small glass where every grain of salt overwhelms your senses. Or you can choose to enlarge your sense of things, to become like this vast lake where the same salt dissolves harmlessly into something much greater." The master paused. "Stop being a glass, my friend. Become a lake." The Buddha once said, "Pain is certain, suffering is optional." This fundamental teaching reveals the heart of our relationship with difficulty. We cannot eliminate the challenges woven into human existence, but we have tremendous power over how that pain affects us. What emerges from this story is understanding about consciousness itself. Our awareness is not fixed in size. It can contract into the narrow confines of a glass, where every difficulty looms enormous. Or it can expand into the spaciousness of a lake, where the same difficulties become manageable. Why do we often choose to be the glass rather than the lake? First is our tendency toward pain myopia, becoming so focused on discomfort that it fills our entire awareness. Second is our habit of story proliferation, taking a single painful event and creating elaborate narratives about how unfair life is. Third is the comparing mind, measuring our pain against an imaginary standard of how life should be. The lake perspective doesn't minimize genuine pain or suggest passivity. Rather, it offers a skillful way of relating to inevitable challenges that doesn't compound them with unnecessary suffering. From lake consciousness, we can respond to problems more creatively because we're not overwhelmed. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." From the lake perspective, we remember that everything arises and passes away within the vast space of awareness. Today's crisis becomes tomorrow's memory. We become a lake through practices that naturally expand awareness. Meditation teaches us to rest in spacious presence. Gratitude helps us notice experiences beyond immediate difficulties. Service reminds us that our pain is part of shared human experience. Tonight, as you reflect on current challenges, can you sense the difference between experiencing them from glass consciousness versus lake consciousness? What would it feel like to allow your awareness to expand beyond the immediate intensity of difficulties to include the vast context of this moment? As the Buddha taught, if you want to know your mind, sit down and observe it. If your mind is clear, happiness will come. The clarity he speaks of is not the absence of salt, but the spaciousness to hold it skillfully. In becoming lakes rather than glasses, we discover that pain can become a gateway to deeper compassion and freedom. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the ultimate nature of spiritual truth. This is the encounter between the emperor and the master. In ancient China, there ruled an emperor known throughout the land for his devotion to the Buddhist path. Unlike rulers who concerned themselves only with wealth and territory, this emperor had spent years studying sacred texts, supporting monasteries, and seeking the deepest truths of existence. His palace library contained thousands of scrolls, and he had invited many learned monks to share their wisdom. When word reached him of a great Zen master whose understanding transcended conventional knowledge, the emperor immediately sent an invitation. He longed to test his own understanding against this master's renowned wisdom. The day of the master's arrival, the palace buzzed with anticipation. The emperor had prepared elaborate questions that would demonstrate both his devotion and sophisticated grasp of Buddhist doctrine. Surely such preparation would impress even the most accomplished teacher. When the master entered the throne room, he appeared utterly ordinary. His robes were simple and travel-worn, his bearing humble yet alert. The emperor, seated on his golden throne beneath paintings of Buddhist saints, felt both excited and nervous. "Venerable master," the emperor began, his voice echoing through the vast hall decorated with precious statues and sacred symbols. "I have studied the Buddhist teachings for many years. I have built temples, supported monks, and devoted my life to understanding the sacred path. Now I ask you, what is the highest truth of the holy Buddhist doctrine?" The emperor leaned forward expectantly, anticipating a profound discourse that would confirm his years of study. Perhaps the master would elaborate on the Four Noble Truths, or reveal some secret teaching passed down through generations. Instead, the master looked directly into the emperor's eyes with a gaze that seemed to see through all pretense. His response came quietly. Vast emptiness, and not a trace of holiness. Silence filled the throne room. The emperor blinked, certain he had misheard. Where was the elaborate explanation of Buddhist cosmology? Where were the references to sacred texts and divine principles? "If there is no holiness," the emperor asked, his voice betraying confusion and dismay, "then who or what are you? If there is no sacred truth to attain, what makes you a master? The emperor's questions carried the weight of years spent accumulating spiritual knowledge and religious merit. He had built his identity around being a devout Buddhist ruler, and this master's words seemed to dissolve the foundation of that carefully constructed self-image. The master's response came with the same quiet directness. I do not know. With these 3 simple words, the master had stripped away every concept, every identity, every claim to understanding that the emperor had accumulated. The master departed as simply as he had arrived, leaving the emperor in contemplative silence. As the Buddha observed, those who think they know don't know. Those who know they don't know, know. This paradoxical teaching points to the heart of Zen understanding. True wisdom begins not with accumulating knowledge, but with recognizing the limitations of conceptual thinking itself. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual seeking often becomes another form of grasping. We collect teachings and insights like precious jewels, believing enlightenment lies in acquiring enough sacred knowledge. But ultimate truth cannot be possessed or described in conventional terms. The master's declaration of vast emptiness points to shunyata, often translated as emptiness. This doesn't mean nothing exists, but that nothing exists in the solid, independent way our thoughts assume. Every phenomenon arises interdependently without fixed essence. This emptiness is not a concept to understand, but a reality to embody. When the master says there is not a trace of holiness, he's not denying spiritual experience, but pointing to truth that transcends dualistic thinking, separating sacred from ordinary. The very search for holiness implies our present experience lacks something essential when completeness is already here. Consider how this teaching might illuminate your spiritual journey. Have you noticed how the mind tries to turn insights into possessions? We have powerful experiences and want to understand, categorize, and repeat them. Yet each time we grasp, we move away from the simple presence that made them possible. The emperor represents the sincere seeker who has confused spiritual materialism with genuine awakening. His years of study weren't meaningless, but they had become obstacles to direct recognition of what was always present. The master's I do not know represents the wisdom of don't know mind. This is not ignorance, but open unknowing that remains receptive to what is actually happening rather than filtering through preconceptions. From this mind, appropriate action arises without conceptual interference. In our culture that prizes knowledge, admitting I don't know feels like failure. But in Zen understanding, this acknowledgement becomes a doorway to fresh perception. The expert mind sees what it expects. The beginner's mind sees what is actually there. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's presence, what would it be like to temporarily set aside everything you think you know about spirituality? Can you taste the freedom in not knowing, the spaciousness that opens when we stop trying to fill emptiness with concepts? As the Buddha taught, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The vast emptiness the master pointed to is infinitely spacious, containing all possibilities while being limited by none. In recognizing this emptiness as our true nature, we discover the most ordinary miracle, this moment, exactly as it is, lacking nothing. Let us continue on our journey with a story about discovering the source of true freedom. This is the tale of the student and the master's heart, In a peaceful monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a young student approached his teacher during evening meditation. The master sat beneath an ancient maple tree, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and golds. This student had been practicing earnestly for years, yet lately questions had been arising that reached deeper than formal instruction. Taking a seat beside his teacher, the student gathered courage to voice what had been troubling him. "Master," he began quietly, "when I was young, I had a deep desire for my family and loved ones to be proud of me. I wanted to excel in studies, to accomplish things that would make them beam with joy. Were you ever the same way?" The master turned his gentle gaze toward the student, seeing in the young man's eyes the same earnest longing that had once driven his own seeking. After contemplative silence, he replied simply, "Yes, I was very much the same." The student felt relief at this admission. "Why did you desire their pride so intensely?" he asked. "What was driving that need for approval?" The master smiled with tender recognition. "I wanted them to feel they had more reason to love and accept me," he said thoughtfully. "If I could make them proud, surely their love would be secure and abundant. But the reason I desired this went even deeper." The student leaned closer, sensing they were approaching something essential. "I sought their love so desperately," the master continued, "because I, in turn, would feel I had sufficient reason to love and accept myself. I was seeking permission from others to feel good about who I was. Their approval would be evidence of my worthiness, even to myself. That was what lay at the root of all my striving." The master paused, watching the first stars appear. "But then one day I awakened to a revolutionary possibility. I realized I could ask myself a different question. What if I could bypass all external validation and simply learn to love and accept myself unconditionally? What if I didn't require anyone else's approval to feel genuinely good about my existence?" The student felt something shift in his chest as these words settled. "I imagined what it would be like if my happiness no longer depended on outer circumstances, on whether people approved or disapproved of my choices. What if my sense of worth could be as constant as my own heartbeat, independent of any external validation?" The student could feel his teacher's words pointing toward a freedom he had never considered. "And that realization began your quest for self-realization?" "Exactly," the master nodded. "That was when my true spiritual journey began, not with seeking something outside myself, but with discovering what was already complete within." After contemplative silence, the student asked, "And did you never again desire their pride? Did that longing completely disappear?" The master chuckled softly. "Oh, my ego certainly continued to desire approval. Conditioned patterns don't vanish overnight, but something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to those desires. I no longer completely identified with my ego as I had before." He gestured toward the darkening garden where fireflies had begun their dance. "I learned to see those approval-seeking thoughts as passing phenomena, like these fireflies appearing and disappearing. I could observe them with interest and compassion, but I no longer gave them power to determine my worth." "So you still cared what others thought?" the student asked. "I respected their opinions and honored their perspectives," the master replied. "But I no longer gave them so much weight. Their approval became like weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, but no longer the determining factor in whether I felt at peace with myself." The master's face radiated quiet joy. "And never had I felt so free as when I finally released myself in this way. It was like discovering I had been carrying invisible chains for decades, and suddenly they fell away. The love I had been seeking outside was revealed to have been within me all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never hurt yourself with destructive thoughts, actions, or choices. This teaching points to the heart of the Master's discovery. Most suffering stems from the mistaken belief that we must earn the right to love ourselves through external achievements or approval. Here we discover one of the most revolutionary insights available. Self-love is not a reward to be earned, but our natural birthright to be claimed. We are born complete and worthy, not because of what we accomplish, but simply because we exist. Why do we find unconditional self-love so difficult? From childhood, we absorb messages suggesting love must be earned through good behavior, achievement, or pleasing others. We learn to treat ourselves the way we were treated, often with criticism and conditions. These patterns become so familiar that unconditional self-acceptance feels foreign. Our culture intensifies this conditioning by promoting the myth that happiness comes from external sources. Each message reinforces the delusion that we are incomplete as we are. Consider how much mental energy goes toward managing others' opinions. How often do you modify authentic expression to gain approval? How much self-worth depends on external feedback rather than internal recognition of inherent value? When we love ourselves unconditionally, we create a foundation of fulfillment that allows us to enjoy others' affection without depending on it. We can receive compliments with gratitude rather than desperate hunger, and handle criticism without devastation, because our core worth remains untouched. The Buddha said, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You, yourself, deserve your love and affection." This isn't narcissism. It's recognition of fundamental truth about consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's quiet, can you sense the presence that is reading these words? This awareness that knows your thoughts and witnesses your experiences is not improved or diminished by anything that happens. It remains constant and clear, like space itself. What would it be like to treat this aware presence with the tenderness it deserves? Perhaps you could offer yourself the same patience you'd give a beloved child learning, or the same compassion you'd feel for a friend in difficulties. As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. Self-criticism is never healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves exactly as we are do we create inner conditions for authentic transformation. In discovering this unconditional love within, we find the freedom we sought through others' approval was always here, beating steadily in our own hearts. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of seeking and finding. This is the master sculptor's discovery. In a bustling stone quarry beneath towering mountains, a master sculptor moved among the marble blocks with the practiced eye of one who had spent decades coaxing beauty from stone. The morning sun cast golden light across the quarry, illuminating countless blocks that seemed to whisper their stories to him. "Aha," he would say, running his weathered hands across smooth surfaces. "There is a heroic figure locked in that piece, and a saint trapped inside that other one." His reputation had grown precisely because of this gift, his ability to sense what he called the suchness of every stone, to see beyond raw material to its true nature waiting to be released. But on this morning, the sculptor's heart carried a different weight. For over 40 years, he had been searching for something special, the perfect block from which he could create his masterwork, a glorious statue of the Buddha. His energies were waning now, and still this elusive Buddha block remained hidden from him. He had traveled to great quarries around the world, consulted experts, hired specialists to scour remote areas. Yet nowhere could he find that one perfect slab that would allow him to release the most perfect likeness of Buddha. Feeling the weight of his lifelong quest, the sculptor sought consolation from a local Zen priest who headed a small temple at the end of his street. The temple was modest, with a peaceful courtyard where a stone well sat surrounded by carefully tended moss. "Master," the sculptor said, bowing deeply, "I have searched for 40 years for the perfect stone from which to carve the Buddha. My life's work remains incomplete." The priest listened with kind eyes, then smiled gently. "No problem," he said, with such simplicity that the sculptor felt both confused and hopeful. "Do you mean you can tell me where I might find the perfect material from which I can release the Buddha of my dreams?" the sculptor asked, excitement rising in his voice. "Of course." "Where?" The priest raised his hand and pointed across the courtyard. "Over there," he said, indicating the stone well. The excited sculptor hurried to the well and peered down into the still, dark water. There, looking back at him with the same questioning eyes, the same lined face marked by years of searching, was his own reflection. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you cannot find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it? The deeper teaching here shows us that what we seek most desperately often lies not in some distant place or perfect circumstance, but in the very ground of our own being. Why do we exhaust ourselves searching everywhere except within? Zen Buddhism reveals that we become so focused on the object of our search that we forget to examine the searcher. The sculptor had examined thousands of stones, traveled countless miles, yet never considered that the very consciousness doing the seeking was itself the perfect material for awakening. Consider how often throughout your day you postpone contentment, waiting for better circumstances. "I'll be happy when I get the promotion, find the right partner, when conditions are finally perfect." This is seeking the Buddha block everywhere except in the reflection looking back at us right now. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." The sculptor's profound realization wasn't that he needed to become something different, but that he needed to recognize what he already was. The perfect material for expressing Buddha nature isn't found in external circumstances, but in the awareness that recognizes, seeks, and creates. The well represents the still point within consciousness, where seeking ends and finding begins. When we stop looking outward and peer into the depths of our own awareness, we discover that the one who seeks and the sought are the same. In Zen practice, we speak of original face, the essential nature that exists before conditioning. This original face isn't hidden in some special place. It's looking back at us from every mirror, every moment of genuine presence. Tonight, as you encounter the reflection of your own seeking mind, can you recognize the Buddha nature that has been with you all along? Perhaps it appears in your capacity for wonder, your longing for truth, or simply in the awareness that notices these very words. As the Buddha taught, look within, you are the Buddha. The masterwork you've been seeking isn't waiting for perfect materials. It's waiting for the recognition that the artist, the art, and the awareness that appreciates beauty are all expressions of the same essential nature. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stonecutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stonecutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stonecutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete. The rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day, he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky. Gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stonecutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. "If only I were rich," he sighed. "Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now." To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noblemen and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought, and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. "I wish to be a cloud." And so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. "A mere rock more powerful than I. I wish to be a rock." Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon, he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. "A puny creature more powerful than me. I want to be a man again." And so he found himself once more a stonecutter, climbing familiar mountain paths. But now, something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned, richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next transformation? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stonecutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. "I'll be happy when I get promoted." only to discover new stresses. I'll be content with more money, only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth. Luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Now, let us experience a Zen story about the unexpected nature of enlightenment. This is the kitchen monk's realization. In the serene mountains surrounding Lake Hakone stood a great monastery known throughout Japan for its rigorous practice and deep wisdom. Among the monks lived a humble man named Ichi, whose life would teach us about the profound difference between seeking and finding. For 55 years, Ichi had labored faithfully in the monastery kitchen, while other monks sat in formal meditation or engaged in scholarly debates. Ichi chopped vegetables, tended fires, and prepared meals with quiet dedication. His hands had grown permanently stained, his back bent from years of service, yet he approached each task with careful attention. But Ichi carried a heavy burden. Since his earliest days, he had been assigned a koan, one of those paradoxical questions that Zen masters use to crack open the thinking mind. His was the famous puzzle. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Day after day, year after year, he wrestled with this question, trying to solve it through logic, intuition, every approach his mind could devise. As decades passed, Ichi began to see himself as a failure. While other monks seemed to progress, receiving new koans, or achieving insights their teachers acknowledged, Ichi remained stuck with his unsolved puzzle. He watched younger monks arrive and eventually surpass him in status and recognition. 55 years, he would whisper while stirring soup. 55 years and still I cannot hear what one hand sounds like when it claps. The question haunted him through every chore, every quiet moment, every season of his long service. Now, as his body grew frail, Ichi knew his time was approaching its end. He had been moved to a small attic room where he could rest away from daily bustle. As he lay there in the gathering twilight of his life, something unexpected began to happen. Gradually, the familiar weight of striving began to lift from his chest. The desperate need to solve his koan, the shame of perceived failure, the constant reaching for enlightenment, all of it slowly dissolved like mist at sunrise. Gone was the fierce desire for awakening that had driven him for decades. In place of all that seeking, Ichi discovered something he had never expected, a profound peace that seemed to cradle his entire being. The soft darkness felt not like defeat, but like the gentlest embrace. His breathing slowed, and with it, the churning of thoughts that had occupied his mind for so many years. It was in this exquisite silence, when there remained no more questions nor need for answers, when even the need for breathing seemed to fade into quiet acceptance, that Ichi finally heard it. The whooshing silence of one hand clapping filled his awareness, not as a sound, but as the very nature of existence itself. The sound that had been present all along beneath all the noise of seeking. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Cease to cherish opinions, and you will achieve enlightenment." Here we discover that enlightenment isn't something we attain through effort, but something we uncover when the effort finally ceases. Why do we struggle so intensely with the very seeking that prevents us from finding what we seek? The mind creates a fundamental split between the seeker and the sought, keeping us perpetually reaching for something we imagine exists elsewhere, in some future moment, when we'll finally get it. Ichi's story illuminates what Zen calls beginner's mind, the fresh awareness that exists before we complicate it with goals and achievements. For 55 years, he had sophisticated simple presence into complex spiritual ambition. The more expertly he sought enlightenment, the further he moved from the naturally enlightened awareness that had been with him all along. Consider how often we create this pattern. We complicate natural joy with the pursuit of happiness. We obscure natural love with the search for perfect relationships. We cover natural wisdom with endless accumulation of knowledge. Ichi's realization came not through solving his koan, but through finally letting go of the need to solve it. The sound of one hand clapping isn't a riddle to be figured out, but an invitation to rest in the space before thinking begins, the awareness that exists prior to questions and answers. Tonight, as thoughts about your own spiritual journey arise, remember Ichi's profound discovery. What if the very awareness that notices your seeking is the enlightenment you've been seeking? The sound of one hand clapping might be closer than you think, in the very listening that hears all sounds, including silence. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Sometimes the greatest achievement is the willingness to stop achieving and simply rest in what has always been present. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of contentment. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a weary traveler encountered a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or scorching heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth boulder, watching his sheep graze contentedly among wild grasses. His face bore the calm expression of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his demeanor, a quality of unshakable serenity that drew the traveler's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with genuine warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like circular logic offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he gestured towards the vast sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson, I have learned to always like what I get, so I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the profound simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding like seeds finding fertile ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the anxiety of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true contentment comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from transforming our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents? The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance. Not passive resignation, but the profound wisdom that recognizes resistance to reality as the primary source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an internal war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for contentment. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day resisting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small contraction in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that accumulates into chronic dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly, rather than allowing them to determine our contentment. Zen master Seng Tsan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest eliminating all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of resistance. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be content when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on external circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his fundamental contentment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if contentment isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in perspective? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. Tonight, as we complete this journey through ancient wisdom, can you recognize that the peace you've been seeking through these stories was never separate from your present awareness? Can you feel how each teaching points not to distant truths, but to the immediate reality of this moment, your breath, your heartbeat, the simple miracle of being awake and listening? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Let us reflect on the path we've traveled together. Each story has offered a unique window into the same essential understanding. That wisdom, compassion, and awakening are available here and now, not in some imagined future or special circumstance. The samurai at the gate revealed how heaven and hell exist in our own minds, created by the quality of our reactions. The captured warrior showed us that tomorrow's fears exist only in thought, while peace dwells in present moment awareness. The serious monk discovered that spiritual seeking becomes its own trap when we cannot receive joy and laughter as teaching. The eager student learned that dividing attention between path and goal actually delays the very understanding we seek. And the king in his palace recognized that all our possessions and positions are temporary dwellings in the inn of existence. Through each tale, the same luminous truth emerges. What we search for through practice, study, and seeking is never absent from ordinary experience. The Buddha nature we hope to cultivate is the very awareness with which we approach each moment of learning. These stories invite us not to accumulate more knowledge, but to recognize what we already are. They point us toward a way of being that transforms suffering into wisdom, reactivity into response, and grasping into graceful letting go. The Buddha taught, 3 things cannot long remain hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. As you continue on your own path, may these ancient teachings accompany you, not as concepts to remember, but as invitations to experience life with greater presence, compassion, and awakening. May you recognize that the very capacity to listen, to reflect, and to seek understanding is itself the enlightened awareness that needs no improvement. When challenges arise, remember the samurai's choice between heaven and hell. When anxiety about the future appears, recall the warrior's return to this moment. When you take yourself too seriously, hear the master's liberating laughter. When urgency clouds your practice, remember that both eyes belong on the path. And when you feel attached to temporary things, smile at the inn that calls itself a palace. Thank you for sharing this contemplative journey with us here at Sleepy Monk. May you rest peacefully tonight, carrying these timeless teachings gently into tomorrow's light, knowing that the wisdom you seek is as close as your next conscious breath.